Hey, good afternoon. I just wanted to welcome everyone back. I had a question today, just based on the current events that's taking place and the current climate. It's really heavy. It's very interesting, brother. My question for the day for you was, why is it that most black liberation movements are backed financially by Caucasians?
It's a great question. Well, if you want to control somebody, you need to control everything about them so that way you or they will be totally interdependent upon one another. And the way that you control people for the long term is to make them think that you're not involved with what it is they trying to do. So you'll have certain stores, you'll have Coca-Cola, for instance. Coca-Cola owns the Dasani water. You know what I mean? A lot of people may not know that. But people think the Dasani water is bad, clean, and pure and all that, and really that's the same water that Coke puts in all of their soda. So this shows you that if they want to get you to buy something and you may not like Coca-Cola, that dislike that you have for Coca-Cola may not go to Dasani. You see what I'm saying? So what we'll do is we'll buy Dasani, or we'll put out Coca-Cola water under the name Dasani and then put it under a whole shell company, and then everybody functions under that when really Coke is getting all the money. So it's the same thing when you're dealing with these organizations that have been doing these things for so-called black liberation. First of all, what we need to understand is that all so-called colorable law, colorable society law, really comes out of something we refer to as eugenics. And anything dealing with eugenics is dealing with the false information that anybody of a darker hue is somehow genetically inferior to somebody without one. When we know that ancestrally, the situation has now become so precedent that people now believe that in order for them to have a certain phenotype, they have to have a Caucasian person in their family. So what this does is it creates the apathetic nature in the mind of the original man or woman that they can't subsist or exist without society, without somebody in society trying to bring them a certain degree of clarity, or somebody that don't look like them bringing them a certain understanding of who and what they are. So they don't believe that they can have a reality or a society without that. So whenever you're in a position where somebody is constantly in the society, constantly telling you how destructive you are in society, constantly marginalizing you in the society, what you have is somebody that is trying to turn a segment into the society into a slave class. That's what's going down. So what we have to understand is that I took some notes just in case, all so-called black Afrocentric movements that started in the United States really come out of the eugenics movement, believe it or not. How can we prove this? Well, all we need to do is look up a guy named Franz Boas. He existed between the years of 1858 and 1942. You also need to look up another dude named Melville Hershkovitz. Melville Hershkovitz, 1895-1963. Why are these two people significant? These two people are significant is because they created what was called the anthropological movement, specifically around the study of so-called African phenotypes. These are the people that coined the term Afrocentric, African-centric, African-American, black, colored Negro. Right now, they just put out a thing that says the United States did a lawsuit, and they came out that the word colored actually means American Indian. It doesn't matter at this point, because anybody that's not functioning under nationality is going down. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, whatever. So I brought those guys up, Mr. Boas and Mr. Hershkovitz, because they were the ones that created the whole science of Afrocentrism. See, it's so bullshit.
Afrocentricism.
Right. See, I can't even say it.
Afrocentricism. Afrocentricism.
He created that.
There we go.
But guess what? These are the guys who were the enlighteners. This is the term now. The enlighteners for the people who were known as the talented 10th. Now, who is that? The talented 10th were the people today that we know as Zora Neale Hurston, W.E.B. Du Bois,
James
Booker T.
Baldwin.
Washington, James Well, James Baldwin came later, but James Baldwin and that whole Harlem Renaissance thing, Madam C.J. Walker, all of these people that were there to promote the idea that the black or the Negro was just as good, if not better, than the so-called white man who was oppressing him and this, and that. You gotta understand, the very premise of you coming from Africa and you being the so-called phenotypical African, that was created by these Caucasian people. But these two Caucasian people who set this up, they came out and were passed the baton for people like Horace Greeley and Thaddeus Stevens, the dude who said "Go West, young man" and Manifest Destiny and all of that. So you have to understand the basis of what we understand as so-called black liberation or black consciousness or what it is we perceive was actually manufactured by people who needed to present us in an inferior denationalized light. And so that's what they did. And so one of the first movements for black liberation that was created by these so-called people was the NAACP, right? One brother told me that NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And remember, I just told you colored mean American Indian. So it's really the National Association, American Association of American Indian People, but they calling it National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. These so-called colored people, who they established this so-called movement for, right, for their own liberation or whatever, these are the people that set it up. So you can see for yourself. So when we talk about these so-called movements and these so-called organizations that are supposed to be there to help promote and bring people into a certain understanding of their own selves culturally, you understand that the people that they're promoting this to have nothing to do with their culture. So what this shows us, one, is that the very foundation of what it is you perceive to be moving forward or moving upwardly or creating a situation by which your people have their own customs and by which they are expressing themselves for themselves, by themselves, we can see that that's not the case. And it hasn't been for some time. So from the very beginning of the eugenics program, this thing was put into play to keep us guessing as to who and what, where we come from, what we doing, why we doing it. So let's move up now to the present BLM movement, what they call that. People don't know what that is. That's called Black Lives Matter, right? Now we have to understand that started as a hashtag from three so-called African American females. Their names were Opal Tometi. No, we don't need to see the writing. Opal Tometi, sister Patrice Colors, and another sister named Alicia Garza.
I'm sorry, I thought you were holding the paper out, and I was just trying to get it in the light.
No, it's all good. So basically,
those three women,
they were part of. Now, the wild thing is that they were allegedly a part of a democratic socialist organization, right? Which is referred to as the Democratic or Democracy Alliance. Now, anytime you deal with democratic socialism, you're dealing with, again, quasi-movements that basically are there for so-called black liberation, but are usually funded by people that aren't black, or are people now by people that aren't so-called black. So in that now, when we talk about the BLM movement, how is it relevant to us if this thing came out of a democratic socialist movement, right? If we're talking about a so-called liberationist movement, how are we turning this into, how is this about so-called black people now, bringing this into a democratic socialist movement, which is quasi, whenever you deal with democratic socialism or democratic nationalism, that's quasi-fascism, okay? That's quasi-neo-Nazism. So when we do the knowledge to it, we find out who's funding this thing. Where did this come from? So from the hashtag that the sisters got, they turned it into some other stuff. The same way they did with twerking. Twerking came from the twerk team. Again, 3 black women who just in their house created something, and now it's become a worldwide phenomenon, and they'd have been cut out of it, right? But that's another story. When we look at the BLM movement now, let's look at who's funding it. Well, I have the pictures, and then I'll go into, these are the pictures of who is actually funding the Black Lives Matter movement. That's Mayor Doomberg. That's Mark Zuckerberg. That's George Soros, George Soros. This is what's this dude? I forget this dude. Thomas
You guys
Creevy.
get the point.
Thomas Creevy. This dude is Rob McCreevy, excuse me. And then you know your man, the Trump card. What this says is this. So let's go through each one of these dudes real quick. George Soros.
Or let's how about instead of going through each one, can we just tie together what they all have in common so that you can think? Because we're at 11 minutes and I know that you want me to stop you at 15.
Okay, let's stop it now and I'll come back.
Great.